There we are. It's going up now. It's going up. 14, 15. Okay. Right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our Evelyn Wrench talk. I am very sorry that our wonderful supper could not take place, but nevertheless, we do have our excellent speaker, Helene Martin-G, who I think is going to provide us with some incredibly interesting talk. And what is also something that you were probably not expecting, and it's quite a treat, is that we have 4 other speakers that will talk about the Pink Shoe Club. And I will ask them 4 questions, the same for each one. And I think that will give you a much richer idea of what the Pink Shoe Club is about. Before I introduce Helen, let me remind you very briefly again of why we're having these lectures. As you know, Sir Evelyn Wrench was our founder, and these talks are given in his honor. He was an entrepreneur, forward thinker, and explorer. He founded the Royal Overseas League in 1910 to broaden international friendship, and importantly, to encourage strong debate over the world's most thought-provoking questions and hard-hitting issues. And we are continuing this tradition. So this is another in our series. I'm delighted to introduce Helene. Helene Martin-G is what she calls herself a serial entrepreneur. She's a non-executive director, investor, and media commentator. And Helen is founder of award-winning businesswomen's network, The Pink Shoe. And she will tell us a lot more about it in a moment. As parliamentary advisor on entrepreneurship and international relations, Helen has worked at the center of UK government for 20 years, engaging all political parties on government think tanks for female enterprise and entrepreneurship. Board member of 3 parliamentary groups, she established the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Entrepreneurship, chairing its advisory board. Having initiated the UK Economic Blueprint for Women and national roadshows supported by NatWest, Helen led on his 2020 government white paper. I'm particularly pleased actually that Helen is joining us because she invited me to join the Pink Shoe Club quite a long time ago when it first started. And I'm very pleased now to be reciprocating that invitation for her to speak to Rosal. So thank you, Helen.
Thank you so much, Eve. And yes, I know you have spoken at the House of Lords on behalf of Pink Shoe on several occasions, and it's always been very engaging. And thank you very much for that lovely, warm introduction. I'm really delighted to speak this evening. I wish I was at the Royal Overseas League in Piccadilly, but at least we're all here together. And I think that's such an important part of the challenging times that we find ourselves in. I'm particularly delighted because the Royal Overseas League seems to promote unity and understanding between nations. And that belief, that tenet, is really at the heart of everything that Pink Shoe does. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about my career as a serial entrepreneur, as Eve said, and then an insight into my work at the House of Lords, and a peek behind the scenes of some of the things that go on in Parliament, in the House of Lords particularly. And then, as Eve has said, I'll introduce these 4 fabulous colleagues from Pink Shoe, Savitas, and we'll tell you more about that a little later. So, my first career. Although I'm an entrepreneur, I actually started out working for the biggest bank in the world. And that was very interesting because it was actually a very entrepreneurial company. Citibank was very radical, I think, in the way it thought about its staff. It would take ideas and suggestions from people. And I had a very hard taskmaster because I worked with the Marks and Spencer accounts, which is at this time, very many years ago. M&S didn't have its own financial services. Citibank maintained them. And what I learned from that was to really put the customer absolutely at the center of everything one does in a business. And as I say, Citibank was very entrepreneurial and would take lots of different ideas. And so that made me think about how I could be creative within a corporate environment. But then I got headhunted and went to work for a small publishing company. And there I really could be entrepreneurial. It was set up by 2 men and they had lots of women on the staff. It was very interactive, great teamwork and really collaborative. And they too would always listen to ideas from the most junior person on the team to the most senior. And that taught me how, if I ever set up my own business, that is how I wanted to run my business. We had lots of fun and we worked very, very hard. We published Car Magazine, and I remember the editor coming in on my first week working there, dangling some keys saying, who wants the Aston Martin this weekend? Sadly, it wasn't me. And in fact, it never did turn out to be me, but it was certainly good fun to work there. I then went to live and work in the US for 2 years, newly married, and worked with a food company over there. It wasn't my area of expertise, but marketing was. And I really enjoyed working in the US and seeing the entrepreneurial spirit at first hand. People over there didn't mind if you had a failure, just get on with it, go on to your next business. And that was amazing groundwork for setting up my own business. So when I came back to the UK, I did just that. I got involved in technology and set up a precursor to Facebook. Sadly, it wasn't quite as, shall we say, successful as Facebook, but it was very good at the time. It was in those days where people were still setting up businesses, tech businesses in their garages and in their spare bedrooms. Probably we've come full circle and we're back to doing that again in these challenging times. But it was a really interesting experience. It was called Big Rag. And although I was in my 20s at the time, I was able to work with students and young people who were going on gap years and starting university. So it's very exhilarating. And then I got back into food. And I'm very proud of the fact that our organic cakes were sold in Galeries Lafayette. I set up a cake business because I love cake, but at the time people were not doing sliced cakes. So I was able to set up a business that sold sliced cakes, beautifully branded and packaged. And they were, as I say, were sold in what I consider to be the center of French patisserie in Paris, alongside brands such as Fortnum and Mason. So I was really proud to be able to do that. However, when I was living in the States, I'd actually studied nutrition. And although the cakes were relatively healthy, I felt there was a gap in the market for a healthy snack. And I believe I'm a pioneer in this because I was at a food show some years ago, and I spotted a guy giving out samples in little packets of his products that were nuts and seeds and healthy things like that. And I thought, why don't you sell the packets of little tiny pocket-shaped snacks that you can pop in your bag? Why don't you sell those? He'd never thought of it. So we had a joint venture together, 50-50 collaboration. We came up with the brand Healthy Days. And the photograph you can see on the screen is of the first packets of Healthy Days snacks coming off the production line. I say production line, but actually they were all hand-packed. And we were very excited about that. I think the lesson I learned from that business was don't sell out too soon, because it was very successful, but I sold my 50% share back to my collaborative partner, and he went on to make a great deal more money out of it. However, it was time for me to move on, and I took the proceeds from that and set up a small property business. So I'd gone, as you see, from clicks to bricks, and now I'm back to clicks again, because I'm working with some technology businesses in the US, very exciting times on blockchain and AI. So that's really a quick canter through my work in corporate life and, as I said, a serial entrepreneur. So what next? Well, alongside all of this, I've been a House of Lords advisor. I still am. And I got into this really through serendipity. So I always say to people, take every opportunity that's offered. I happened to see a chap walking down the road surrounded by the world's media in the Cotswolds, where I had a weekend place. I thought, this guy really looks as though he could do with some help. So I picked up the phone, managed to get through to him, and I said, you really look as though you need a hand. You look very busy. Next thing I knew, I was his campaign manager, working to fight to win a general election. I'd never been involved in politics before. My only previous experience had been a school trip to the Houses of Parliament when I was about 10, and I got into trouble for sitting in the Speaker's chair, which was strictly forbidden. We'll hear a little bit later from Jill Pay, and I'm sure if she'd been Sergeant at Arms at the time, I would have been told off a lot more than I was. But anyway, so I got involved in politics that way, and it was a really interesting time. I then got involved with Geoffrey Archer and his mayoral campaign. As you may know, in the UK, certainly maybe further afield, that didn't end particularly well. The campaign was going brilliantly until various items came in the news. And I'd taken off a 24-hour gap to get away because we were working full on. And I was in the wilds of Devon, and I turned on my phone, had about 100 messages and texts, had to drive madly back to London to find out what was going on. And of course, Lord Archer was unable to carry on with the campaign. And although that was really disappointing with all the hard work we'd put in, I had a lot of respect for him because his whole team were called to the penthouse apartment, the famous penthouse apartment on the Thames, and he apologised personally to each of us. It also helped that we drank lots of Krug and lovely champagne and ate lovely food and went away with a bottle of Krug and a truckle of English cheese. But it really stuck in my mind that if you do make a mistake, say sorry and don't be afraid to admit that you got it wrong, you messed up. So, as a special advisor in the House of Lords, a lot of my work is being the power behind the throne. It requires being diplomatic, being discreet, not talking out of turn, and really being very careful that protocol is followed at all times. I've hosted lots of events with people from all different nations, and you really have to be on your toes. On a number of occasions, I've had to step in at the last minute if there's a long vote in the House of Lords, if the peer is in the chamber and is stuck there, or perhaps a family emergency. I remember once when we were hosting an event for two nations that didn't get on terribly well. And due to a bereavement, the peer was called away at the very last minute. Luckily, I'd helped to write his speech, and his researcher and I stood outside the room literally 5 minutes before I had to welcome the ambassadors of these two not so friendly nations and make sure that the protocol was followed so that they were introduced in the right order and everything went smoothly. Luckily, I did get away with it that time, and we had a very successful event. They had no idea that it wasn't as we planned it. We've mentioned all party groups, and Eve very kindly talked about that in her introduction. And they are really a very powerful way of influencing, just gently influencing government and policy, because they truly are all party. They cannot be registered as a group if all the political parties aren't involved in some way, shape and form. So lots of exciting socialising things happening in the House of Lords as well. But there are some very serious parts to being a special advisor. I've had to do some really difficult things, such as write letters of clemency to heads of state, asking them to intervene with terrorist groups on behalf of British or Western people being held hostage. And of course, the difficult thing is that they haven't always, in fact, generally are not successful, but one still has to try. So things like that do make things very difficult. And it is, I suppose, really a compensation for some of the hard things we have to do, that we're able also to advise in much more positive ways of bringing people together internationally and working on that unity that is really at the heart of the Royal Overseas League. And here, some of the benefits of working in the House of Lords. I said I'd give you a glimpse behind the scenes. But here is a picture I'm sure will be familiar to everyone the world over, the state opening of Parliament. Now, this is the Sovereign's carriage going past our marvellous viewpoint, where we're able to enjoy the state opening twice last year, although not perhaps with such ceremony the second time, although still with a very important day. So that's one of the privileges of working in the House of Lords, and really a great treat to be able to go to these events. So we've seen the royal procession. Well, what happens next? So here are a few snaps, and forgive the quality of some of these pictures because they are taken on my phone and sometimes in places, dare I say, where I perhaps shouldn't be taking photographs. You may know that the Crown has its own carriage, and there it is there photographed for you to see. And the window below it with the diamond is just a peep through from one of the wonderful House of Lords windows to watch all the carriages as they are waiting for the procession to go back. In the middle, you'll see the Sovereign's entrance, and that's the Queen's, the Sovereign's carriage coming in to the House of Lords for the state opening of Parliament. So the Queen is only able, the Sovereign is only able to come to the House of Lords by invitation. This goes back in history, and I'm not going to spend time talking too much about that, but it's now only by invitation that the Queen will come. And I know you've been lucky enough to hear from Jill Pay if you were at an earlier, the very first of these lectures. So you may have heard a little about the ceremony at that event then. And the other pictures here are the Queen processing through from the robing room, through the Royal Gallery and into the chamber to deliver the Queen's speech. So a huge amount of pomp and ceremony, but for a very important government business that she will be announcing to all political parties. And here we are behind those scenes. So you've seen the lovely picture of the Royal Gallery, and the reason I've shown those chairs is because I've been lucky enough on a few occasions to sit in those very chairs and watch the Queen process as she goes into the chamber of the House of Lords. It's quite a long wait, to have to wait for about an hour, waiting, being seated half an hour beforehand, waiting for the Queen to come, to put on the ermine and to come through. And I remember once hosting a particular ambassador. And of course, we're sitting there for a long time, and I think he was terribly thirsty. I had a tiny little bag with me, but luckily in that bag was some peppermints. And I was able to surreptitiously pass him peppermints to keep him going while we were waiting for the Queen, and then of course watching her come, and then waiting for her to come back after she'd been in the chamber. And so I was delighted when a couple of days later, I got the most scrumptious box of chocolates and rather lovely, very kind note from him saying how grateful he was for my peppermints. I think that was fair exchange. So, as I say, the Queen is now in the chamber delivering the Queen's speech, but where are we? Well, you can see lots of lovely ascot hats there. As we have watched the Queen process into Parliament, we're then watching on a monitor to see the Queen's speech, and we then go over to a lovely private room where we have a lunch between us all. And some of the photographs here are just snaps that we've taken during that lunch. And a very severe law lord standing there because he knows full well that photograph should not have been taken. It's strictly forbidden, but luckily they bend the rules a little. And just wanted to show there a friend who is, that was the first time he, Lord Woolley, he'd been an Oval just a little while before, and that was the first time he'd attended the state opening of Parliament as a peer. So it was a very exciting day for him and lovely for us to see him. So behind the scenes. So here's the band of the Royal Marines, part of the royal procession going back to Buckingham Palace and escorting the Queen and entourage and the many carriages. But of course, the Queen, the monarch, has the throne within the chamber of the House of Lords, but extra thrones are brought in. Because of course, if you think about it, if you've got the Duke of Edinburgh, as it used to be, and now Prince Charles and the Duchess of Cornwall will accompany the Queen when she comes to the state opening, but there's only one throne. So extra thrones are brought in from other palaces. And here we have the porters of the House of Lords taking those thrones away. It's very quick and very slick the way they do that, but it's rather exciting to see. And I just wanted to share with you some of the glory and splendour of working in the House of Lords. I don't know how many of you have visited the Palace of Westminster, but of course it is two separate houses under one roof. The House of Lords and the House of Commons operate separately. And if you're in the House of Commons, you can always tell because it's green leather everywhere and green carpet. The House of Lords, red leather and red carpets, except where the carpets are blue. And the reason for those carpets being blue is that those are the parts where the peers, the sovereign, will go. So the Royal Gallery is carpeted in blue when the Queen arrives for the state opening of Parliament. And you can see here the room with a tiny throne just at the far of that photograph. And that is the Queen's robing room. So when she arrives through the Sovereign's entrance and goes up the stairs towards the robing room, there will be a cheval mirror there, and she'll be able to make sure that she's looking absolutely proper as she goes in. And of course, you'll see that the peers there, they're all wearing their ermine, although these days, if they prefer, they can have man-made fibre rather than the fur around the robes. And the robing room will be full of lots of coat hooks with lots and lots of robes there. The peers don't always own their own. They often hire them for the day. And so they have to put their names down in advance. And if they don't do that in time, there won't be enough robes to go around. And then they can't go into the chamber to hear the Queen's speech. Now, I work with the Earl of Errol, who's an hereditary peer, although very hardworking. He's one of 90 remaining hereditary peers, and he's actually wearing his grandfather's robes. So it shows you how long they last. One of the other rooms with the green wallpaper is the River Room. This became famous in the UK because the wallpaper was replaced at quite some expense. Because it's an historic palace, of course, it had to be done properly, but there was quite a lot of fuss about it at the time. However, one of the benefits of that is that we're able to hold charitable events in there. And in fact, I'll come on in a moment to the launch of Pink Shoe, which was held in that very room. You can see another area with a table in the middle, and that is the Prince's Chamber. And you've probably heard the expression off the record. And you may know that everything said in the Palace of Westminster in either chamber, both in the House of Commons and in the House of Lords, is recorded. So the phrase off the record comes from that very Prince's Chamber, where people not wishing to have their words recorded will come outside the House of Lords chamber in order to have a private conversation. And the photograph there, the big photograph, is that Royal Gallery, but back to its normal daily attire of just red leather chairs where we can have meetings. And I was very glad to know our first patron for Pink Shoe was Benazir Bhutto. Very glad to know her rather well. And she and I, with another peer, had a conversation in there very late one night after dinner when she was planning to go back to Pakistan. And it was quite spooky because the lights were very low, the whole place is empty, and the Palace of Westminster is a very large, and that's a very large cavernous room. And we heard these footsteps coming towards us, but couldn't see anyone. We were convinced for a moment it was a ghost, but luckily then somebody appeared from around a corner and we realized we weren't being haunted. So that's just a little bit about the customs and protocol of the House of Lords, and I hope you can tell that I really love working there. And in that very River Room, as I mentioned, we launched Pink Shoe back in 2007. So why did I launch a Business Women's Network? There were a few around at the time, there are many more now, but I really wanted to bring together my different skills, working in Parliament as a parliamentary advisor, as an entrepreneur, and just being in business generally. I thought it was important to be able to bring that together. And our motto within Pink Shoe is around the lifelong development of women. But another area in which we're very active is bringing more people into Parliament. So the River Room itself used to be the family apartments of the Lord Chancellor. And in the times when it was the Lord Chancellor's apartments, we were lucky enough to be able to hold a party there. This was just before the launch with Pink Shoe. The Lord Chancellor at the time had a young family. And when we arrived with the Committee for Save the Children Fund to hold this charity party, there was washing festooned all along the radiators. Like anyone on a damp day like today, they need to get the washing dry, and that's where it was. So I asked one of the attendants, look, we've got 100 people arriving for a champagne reception. Could we move the washing? Oh, no, we couldn't possibly do that. It's nothing to do with us. It's not our job. They were worried, really, that they didn't want to interfere. So I thought, how would I feel if I was about to have 100 people for a party in my house, were it to be able to fit 100 people, and my washing was left everywhere? So I got my fellow committee members, including the wife of a judge and the owner of a major London department store, and we went around the Lord Speaker's apartments and collected all the washing very carefully, folded it up and put it behind the scenes. A little later, as the party was in full flow, Lady Irvine, the wife of the Lord Chancellor, came up to me quietly and said, thank you so much for moving the washing. I'd hoped to be back much earlier, but we were stuck in traffic and I was having a nightmare worrying about it. So I think we made the right decision. But anyway, back to Pink Shoe launch. So we've moved on from the Lord Chancellor now, and the very first Lord Speaker, in fact, the first two Lord Speakers have both been women. And the first Lord Speaker is Lady I beg your pardon, Helene Hayman, Baroness Hayman, and she hosted the launch of Pink Shoe, along with both our patrons. Our founding patron was Benazir Bhutto, sadly no longer with us, and our patrons were both with us for the launch, and that is the Olympic gold medalist Tessa Sanderson and Theresa May, former Prime Minister and MP for Maidenhead, currently MP for Maidenhead. So a very exciting evening, and as you can see, we were having an absolutely great party in that in the House of Lords. Very privileged to be there. And I just really now want to canter through just a little bit of the work that we do. As I said to you, one of the reasons for setting up Pink Shoe was the close links to Parliament and the privilege of being able to bring people into Parliament. Through Pink Shoe, we do this through a variety of means. We love to have young people and students involved, and one of our ambassadors, Lynn Turner, has brought many school parties from inner city schools into the Palace of Westminster, into the House of Lords. They've been able to interview peers and entrepreneurs and really find out about history and what goes on in Parliament. Pink Shoe is an early partner of Parliament Week, which is actually next week. And this is again a way of outreach, creating links with people around the country and around the world to bring more people into Parliament so they can find out what happens. And the roundtables that we have bring in women of all different backgrounds and indeed men, where we talk about different issues, women in music, women in construction, women in the arts, really looking at ways of bringing people together. And that's the real message with Pink Shoe. You can see the rather large photograph there. I don't know if you can make out, but this is Voice and Vote, which was an amazing exhibition put on to celebrate the centenary of the first women in the UK getting the vote. And here we all are standing in Westminster Hall, which is an area, the oldest part of the parliamentary building, an area that is jointly shared between the House of Lords and the House of Commons. And that was just the most amazing event we had there, where we were all coming together, seeing an exhibition and celebrating the centenary of some women getting the vote. We do such things as have an International Women's Day afternoon tea, and again, that's a forbidden photograph there if you can see it, in the Peers dining room. You luckily can't see the Baroness who was hosting us that day. And we've had the honour of going into the Act Room, where the very Acts of Parliament are stored, and being able to visit that and see the scrolls going back for ages to very old acts, and of course including that important act giving some women the vote. So that's just a little canter of some of the work we do in Parliament, and I had to show you this. As you will know, the Queen's Diamond Jubilee was celebrated a few years ago, and we decided to have a street party, as many people were doing around the country, but we decided to have ours in the House of Lords. It was a very, very special occasion. You can probably see there set up with bunting and union flags everywhere, and people were invited to wear their best ascot hats or their celebratory hats or national costume. We had the most incredible afternoon tea. Really was a very special day. And I was lucky enough a couple of days later, I don't know if you can just see that shot of the royal barge. I was able to go onto the terrace of the House of Lords and watch the flotilla go by. It was a dreadful day, rather like it is today where I am, where it's pouring with rain, but it was really a very, very special few days. The whole country got behind the Queen to celebrate such an incredible achievement of 60 years on the throne. Some of the other work that Pink Shoe does is international work. We're privileged to be able to host people from around the world, and I've just taken a few snapshots here. This is a delegation from China, one from Turkey, and one from Malaysia. And we're really very honoured to be able to host so many different people from around the world to show them our Parliament, to build business links and connections between nations. And again, coming back to the Royal Overseas League and why I'm so happy to be talking to people who share those same values and those same ideas around unity between us. There's also a group there, the bigger picture with a wonderful oil painting in the background is a group of students from Middlesex University. And again, we love the idea of bringing young people into Parliament so they can find out more about what makes government tick, and it really helps them in the future. And then one of our afternoon teas there was hosted by Baroness Burt, and there she is giving us a talk in the corridor. And again, that's one of those naughty pictures I shouldn't have taken. And we've mentioned all party parliamentary groups, and some of my colleagues on this call today are pictured there with a report that the Women in Enterprise all party group published last year. It's very exciting, and it's a real privilege to be able to be involved in such things. Democracy. We've got a big general election coming up, global election coming up with the US next week, and everyone is thinking about elections. But last year in the UK, we had an election that was also very important. People were voting on things that really matter to them, as I hope they always are. I've shown there, and I don't know if you can see them on the screen. In my screen, I can't actually see very well, but Votes for Women is an original suffragette banner from many, many years ago when women had to fight for the vote. And that's why to Pink Shoe, it's doubly important that voting matters. And we're very lucky to have been able to bring together so many people in Parliament, including Baroness Boothroyd, the first female Speaker of the House of Commons, and now in the House of Lords. We're bringing together women and men, people of all cultures and backgrounds, to really start to point out to people how important voting is. And I know in the States at the moment, there are record numbers of people voting. They've certainly got that message. So this is just one of the things that Pink Shoe does, really, to get that democracy message across. It really is so important. So away from Parliament, what does Pink Shoe do? All sorts of things and all around the country. One of our highlight events of the year is the International Forum at the Shard. This year in January, we held our 6th International Forum. And we're lucky to be hosted by the Warwick Business School there, and the Enterprise Research Centre supports our work. We bring together women and men from around the world and all around the country. And we discuss topics such as access to finance, getting more women involved in politics and in business, and looking at ways that we can really start to learn together and to pull together as women and as men in business, both as entrepreneurs and in corporate life. It's a very exciting and interactive event, and it's a real privilege to be part of it. And as you can see, there were quite a number of us there earlier this year. The ideas coming out of that international forum have been feeding into the UK Economic Blueprint for Women. Now, this is a national programme that we run, taking a model from the US, a very successful model from women impacting public policy, but making it bespoke to the UK. So following on from our work at the forum in the Shard, we set up a national roadshow going around the country to 6 different venues, supported by NatWest, and listening to women in business to ask them what it is that they need to help them to start up and, more importantly, to scale up their businesses. So over 400 women gave us their ideas and their input, and we look at really some key issues there around access to finance, access to markets such as procurement from large businesses, access to data, because if you don't measure it, how do you know how successful you're being? And access to training and including mentoring, very importantly. And we added a dimension to the American model, and that was technology. As somebody very much involved in technology, and I know we all believe it underpins every single business decision that we make, it's absolutely vital. So the UK Economic Blueprint for Women listened to all those women and produced a white paper. It would have been launched earlier this year, but circumstances really prevented that, as we all know. So last month, we brought together many of the women who'd been part of that roadshow to listen to what was happening in light of COVID, to see how we needed to refresh the recommendations that we were making. So taking on board those new and refreshed ideas, we will now be publishing our white paper on the 18th of November in Global Entrepreneurship Week, taking all those ideas forward and making recommendations to government and to the private sector of what women themselves who own and run businesses need in order to make those businesses more successful, and of course to impact on the global and the UK economy. So that's very important work that Pink Shoe does. And a team of 100 volunteers in lots of different work streams have worked incredibly hard to make that happen. We don't just look at business, we're also very passionate about getting more women onto boards and especially into ministerial public appointments or as non-executive directors. And we're extremely lucky in Pink Shoe to have a head of leadership in Vanda Green, who's got so much experience and expertise, having worked with the Work Foundation and spent many years in leadership and leadership profiling. So the Boardable programme that Vanda put together, along with myself and others, looks at different aspects of leadership. And I'm delighted, in fact, Eve herself has been through the Boardable programme and is an alumna of that programme. And we have 3 other alumni with us, and we'll hear from those later. And the programme itself is unique in that it, I suppose, combines learning through seminars and some very challenging situations that we put people in, really putting them on their toes, with a connection through somebody who's already got a ministerial public appointment, probably a woman, but it could be a man. So somebody who's already in that role is able to really tell how it is from the inside. So along with Vanda, we have a patron who is very involved in this, Sarah Anderson, who chaired the Anderson report and has chaired the recruitment of people who are on ministerial boards. So that's very important to have that inside track. And I just wanted to share some images here of some of the people who've been through that programme, and you can see what an amazing group they are. They're already leaders, they're senior women and people of different diverse backgrounds in their fields, and we're just helping them along the way. And we've had great success already with people getting into ministerial roles and onto boards, both in the National Health Service and elsewhere, and as chief executives if they've decided to take that route. So some really good success from that, and it's been a very successful programme. Some of it we use online, some of it we now deliver online, but it's really important to create that peer group between each cohort, and they're now linking together as we get more and more groups going through. So it's a very exciting programme. So since 2007, we've had 13 years of amazing Pink Shoe awards, events and activities. And here is just a snapshot. Now you might be wondering why there is somebody standing there with an upside down pink umbrella. That is Antonella Ragona, who is one of our marketing leads and a very great ambassador and key part of Pink Shoe. And Antonella came up with the idea as we were approaching the 10th anniversary of Pink Shoe that we should put together a time capsule. And so that is what Antonella is doing. She's putting her message into her future self. It isn't staying in that umbrella for the next however many years. It's now safely kept, all the ideas and all the messages. We launched that event at the Speaker's House, and we're very privileged and lucky to be able to be there. And many, many people came together to put their message into the time capsule. What message would they send to their future self? And we don't know what will happen and what those messages will be. But in 2030, we will be opening those messages, and we'll all be able to look back to see what we said about ourselves and what we hope to be able to be doing, and how the world will be in 2030, which is rapidly approaching. Some of the images here are also of some of the events that we hold, very much celebratory, but also bringing people together. It's networking, but it's also creating business opportunities and relationships between people so that we can support each other in whatever field we're in. We've also held some events where we've celebrated women, giving them awards. Our very own Jill Pay is one of them. And you can see that beautiful, I hope, stained glass window. That is actually in honour of the Queen's Jubilee, and now is up in the very high walls of Westminster Hall. So we were very lucky to be able to actually see it before it was situated in there. And that was one of Jill's projects when she was at the Palace of Westminster in her role there. So very lucky to be able to bring together such amazing women. The rather interesting equalities image is of a tea that was held to celebrate the vote for women, and very exciting it was too. So there you see just a few little snapshots of some of our activities over 13 years. So what have we done post-COVID? Well, obviously we're in very different times. We're here this evening on Zoom rather than having a rather lovely supper together, although it's still very nice to be able to interact. And so Pink Shoe itself has been running on-air sessions. I tend to prefer interactive events myself. As people know, we have a speaker for about 20 minutes, as many people do. But afterwards, we share cocktails or champagne together in fizz time, where we catch up with the news from each other. We limit the numbers of people to around 20, 22 people each time, so that we can have a chance to really interact and catch up. And the exciting speakers that we've had have talked about the most amazing things. Lynn Kopp, who talked about her amazing leadership book, Dancing Around the Handbags. And then we had Callie Bird talking about Tales of the Countess, which was also a handbag-based book. And so, of course, we had to have a session where we all bought our favourite bags and talked about why it was our favourite handbag. During Easter, we had an Easter bonnet parade, and you may be able to see on that picture there that we're all wearing rather nice hats. And we've had talks from Anita Corbin, who set up the first women exhibition, which is now live at Exeter Museum. And I do encourage you, if you're in that area, or at least to visit it online. We've had meditation sessions, we've had inspirational sessions from a young woman and talking about her career, or from Maggie Semple talking about her life as a Queen's Counsel selection panelist and also as an entrepreneur. And those extraordinary, that picture you can see of us all very topically wearing our masks, those masks are actually made by Maggie Semple's company. We've had people talking about sustainable journeys where they've cycled around the UK, and we've had people talking about the different experiences they've had in their lives wherever they've come from, opening an art gallery to selling a master in New York, so an old master in New York. So that's really been a very quick snapshot of what we've been doing since we've been unable to meet in person. I'm bringing you right up to date. This is just last week. We held online the inaugural World Business Women's Day. Now, this was a really exciting day. It was actually an event that was going to happen next spring, but I don't know if you know that there's been quite a lot of research from the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, amongst others, just explaining that women are being more adversely impacted by COVID, and particularly women in work. So we wanted to explore with other women from around the world, why was that happening and what solutions could we find between us? So we limited it to 60 women and brought those women together from 25 different nations and 5 different continents with one goal. And that goal was to say, what do we know that we can share between us so that we don't need to reinvent the wheel, and we can start to put in place some mechanisms that will help to support women in work. And that is what that day did. It was a very exciting and very innovative day, and it will now not just be World Business Women's Day, but next year we are going to have World Business Women's Week. So successful was the inaugural event. It was opened by Theresa May. We heard from Alison Rose, the most powerful woman in UK banking. But more importantly, we had 8 discussion groups of women who were leaders all around the world and in the UK, sharing between themselves ideas around technology or finance, marketing, market access and data. So some very important work was done, and we will be publishing that report shortly. So I've talked a lot about Pink Shoe, but actually we're changing our name. We're changing our name to Savitas, and that will be Savvy Women Leaders with Gravitas. The reason for that is that we are now doing so much work internationally that we need to be able to expand our brand and make ourselves more understandable. But Pink Shoe itself will live on, because our lovely social events, our on air, our aperitivo, and our soirees, when we're able to meet back together again, will all be held under the banner of Pink Shoe. So we have a new brand, we have some exciting new programs and an exciting future. I'd just like to share just a couple of those with you, and then I would like to invite my colleagues to speak with you, other inspiring women, because teamwork is at the heart of Pink Shoe. Everything we do is collaborative. It's not just me, it's many, many, many other women and men who work together. So inspiring. But one of the things that we've noticed is that there aren't actually that many women on panels around the world. You may have heard of Manels, when we can still see in 2020 that there will be conferences with only men on the panel. So we'll be setting up in the new year a speaker hub, and you will hear from Dr. Amita Krishna later just about that and about some of her inspiring work. So we have a very exciting future, working collaboratively and together. We really are those savvy women with gravitas, but we will not lose our Pink Shoe roots. So thank you for listening, and I'm now going to hand over to one of my colleagues, the chairman of the Pink Shoe Senate, and as mentioned in dispatches, the past and the first female Sergeant at Arms in the House of Commons in almost 600 years. And you have been lucky enough, if you've been to hear her lecture, you've been lucky enough to hear from her before. And certainly within Pink Shoe, we're very lucky to hear from Jill. She doesn't just work with Pink Shoe, she's chairman of Charity of Trustees with the Beanstalk Core and Beanstalk Literacy Charity, and does many other things as well. So Eve, I'm now going to hand over to you to ask the questions and pass over to Jill.
Thank you very much, Helen. For those of you who came to our very first supper, you remember Jill Pay, because she gave us the most wonderful talk and gave us an insight into a world we really knew very little about. So Jill, welcome. Before we start, I would like to tell everyone that please start putting in your questions under the Q&A function. But please make sure that I have your name so that I can actually acknowledge you as the questioner. And if your question is for one specific speaker, again, please make sure that that is clear. Otherwise, I will put it to the whole panel. So, Jill, lovely to see you. And of course, Jill has been an honorary member of Rosol since she gave us our talk, and you would have seen her often around. She's often at the club, and particularly fond of theatre, ballet.
Absolutely.
What is the career step of which you're most proud?
Well, I think, as you will know, and you will have heard from me and from Helene, that my longest part of my career was in the House of Commons. And there are two steps there that I'm proud of, and they are linked. But to give you some context, my background is business management, and I worked for 10 years in advertising. I worked in the private medical sector. I worked for the employment department on an education project. I worked in training. And all the skills and experiences I learned in my early career came together and enabled me to apply and achieve the post of head office keeper in the House of Commons, which in our language is the facilities manager. So that was my first step at the very bottom of the ladder. And looking back, I now realise how significant that was. And by climbing up that ladder over the next few years and 4 or 5 different jobs in the House, on the 30th of January 2008, my appointment as the first woman Sergeant at Arms was announced by press release from Buckingham Palace. So that was the most memorable step at the top of the ladder.
Good, excellent. Thank you. If you could actually put yourself back when you were 21, what do you wish you would have known when you were 21?
Yes, I would like to have known that imposter syndrome is a complete waste of time and should be absolutely banished.
That's wonderful. Which woman, living or from history, inspires you the most, and why?
Well, the most inspirational woman to me is Betty Boothroyd, who you've heard mentioned earlier, not for her political views, but because she's very strong. She has a backbone of steel. I believe she has absolute integrity. And yet beneath that veneer, she's very compassionate and she shows great compassion to people. And she's a woman of great style.
And the final question is, how would you describe Pink Shoe or Savitas in just one word?
Oh, my whole experience from the launch in the River Room has been energizing. It's energizing because of the programs we run, the events we have, but mostly about the inspirational women that we meet and attract. It's totally energizing.
Thank you, Jill. And yes, that's wonderful. And so, Helen, if you would like to introduce our next speaker, please. You're muted, Helene. Helene, you're muted.
Yes, I seem to have lost my presentation. So I don't know what's happened with technology. There's always something. So I would like now to verbally introduce someone that you can see, and that is Noreen Cesario. Noreen is founder of Market Accents. She's a director of the Malta Business Network and a trustee of the Commonwealth Girls Educational Trust. Noreen, if I may hand over to you, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Helene.
So, hello, Noreen, and welcome. And now we'll ask you the exact 4 questions that I asked Jill. So what is the career step in which you're most proud?
Prior, before starting Market Accents, I used to be a banker. I worked in financial services, mostly international payments. However, my most defining career step happened much, much earlier, actually, when I was still in Malta. So I started my career very early, straight out of college, as a young marketing executive in a large organization. I was working in marketing and PR. And at that time, my desired course of study at university was not on offer. Undeterred, I went off to work whilst I waited. But in the meantime, there was an opening for a course, which was a new diploma university course in journalism. And I thought, this sounds interesting. I was not at university, but somehow they still accepted me as a mature student at the young, tender age of 17, which was brilliant. It opened up massive amount of doors, and I continued studying, and within a year it became a full-time course leading on to a full degree. And obviously I was overjoyed at being part of it, and I was actually one of the very lucky ones to graduate from that very first batch. And it was a defining career move because it actually opened up my eyes to possibilities that at that age and at that time I just hadn't considered. By then, I was actually working for local newspapers as a freelance journalist, and I had left the organization where I started working to work with one of the leading agencies on the island. And I actually started the PR department. Obviously, I had a lot of contacts with the media, so it was just natural I fell into it. But not only did I do that, I was the only female account director on the island and the youngest. And my creativity knew no bounds. With a group from university, I found myself writing film scripts for a 13-episode TV program. Obviously, I had a few cameo roles in that. I was asked by the Department of Culture to help organize and manage the marketing and PR for 2 major concerts, Joe Cocker and Tina Turner. Brilliant. And then I also organized on behalf of some of my clients a national beach party with international music acts and the whole kiosk type food and drink set up by the local hotels and restaurants serving food from all over the world. We catered for about 35,000 people at each of those events. So it wasn't a small event. Obviously, they were heady days and I just loved them. And then after a while, I decided I wanted to switch back to client side, and I just wanted to switch from client side and work with the products again. So I moved back into the world of food and drink, hospitality and technology. And that was where I had another defining moment. I realized I wanted to get ahead and I needed to go back to study. So off to university I went again, and I wanted to do an MBA, but my professor actually advised me to do a master's in strategy rather than an MBA. He said, you already have a lot of experience and this would be more beneficial for you. So off I went. And he told me I would get a lot out of it, and he was very, very right. So I held a full-time job for 2 years and studied at all hours as well, managed to juggle, not sure how. By that time, I was actually working with Thomas Cook, and I was setting up their strategy and marketing department and also running 2 travel shops. My focus area was communications with learning organizations, and I based my research on Thomas Cook and another professional services company. And once I graduated, Thomas Cook said, come over to the UK and help us on our global strategy. This was just before the dot-com boom. Needless to say, I jumped at the opportunity, packed my bags, and promptly went down to Thomas Cook in Piccadilly, and the rest is history. I've worked in Canada, in the US, in the UK. I've dealt with people all over the world. I'm just so glad that I actually packed my bags and came along. It wasn't easy. I pushed a lot of doors which were not really open, but I went through them with my Mediterranean charm, passion, and character. So it was a stepping stone to the next stage in my life and career, an Anglo-Malt entrepreneur with a keen interest in international markets, a trustee with the Commonwealth Girls Education Fund, which worked very closely with you at Russell here, and actually very actively working on women's economic empowerment to open up international markets for women-owned business. So
thank you, Noreen. And the next question is, what do you wish you'd known when you were 21?
That it is okay to make mistakes, to recognize them, learn from them, and do not let them discourage you or mark you for life. I set my personal standards very high, and I used to be very, very harsh on myself at that age. As well as I was working with a lot of companies and a lot of traditionally male-oriented sectors. So I had to work doubly hard to deliver. And actually once I was meant to have arranged a meeting with a very important high profile person who ended up not turning up. And I was so embarrassed, I was so crushed. I actually offered my resignation on the spot to my director, who laughed at me and said, these things happen, don't worry. But it was that thing that you can move on from mistakes. Mistakes do happen.
Yes, yes, I agree with you. So which woman, living or from history, inspires you the most and why?
We've seen a bit of her already. It's Queen Elizabeth II. She is a woman for all times. She has managed to stay with the times. She remains classically timeless. She's dignified. She brings her decorum to everything. Her diplomatic skills are without, any par. It's her ability to lead, and yet she's human too. She's endured many unthinkable situations, survived many politicians, many regimes, and she's admired worldwide. I think it was Helen Mirren who said the Queen has maintained her dignity and her sense of duty over the years, also her hairstyle, but that's okay.
And finally, in one word, how would you describe Pink Shoe or Savitas?
To me, it is a diamond. It's brilliantly cut. It reflects back each and every one of us, all the people you've seen in the pictures, the influences, the connections, it pivots, it can, it would sparkle anywhere. And yes, it shows off our savviness.
Thank you so much, Noreen.
Thank you.
Helen, our next speaker.
Thank you very much. So inspiring to hear both from Jill and Noreen there. Thank you, Eve. So third, I would like to call upon Susan Greenwood, FRSA. Now, Susan is a recognised leader in social entrepreneurship. She's worked for many, many years helping and supporting people with disabilities to set up businesses. She takes short shrift from those people and she makes sure that they set up their businesses to be properly, durable as businesses. But she's also a qualified member of the judiciary and works incredibly hard to support Pink Shoe. She's just taken on the role, we're delighted, as our Deputy Chairman for the International Senate, that is the Pink Shoe Advisory Board. So amongst all the other things that Susan does, she's extremely inspirational and I look forward to hearing from her. Over to you, Eve, and thank you, Susan.
Thank you very much. Welcome, Susan. Again, what is the career step of which you're most proud?
It's an interesting question that. My life has gone in about 3 stages. I had my early career when I worked in science and then I went into a life of marriage and having a child and travel and that sort of area. And I was very lucky. I managed to live in Argentina and I lived in Indonesia for several years, but then returned home as a single person and had to make my way in life. As a blind single person, I found that very difficult because I found a lot of discrimination. And that discrimination is not always upfront. It comes at you from different angles and you can't prove it. So getting a job was very difficult. So I ran charities and I used to go in and say, I'll just do this little job, and ended up taking over because that's how I work. But my most important area was when I set up Destiny, which was a social enterprise. It was the first CIC in my area, which is a community interest company. And that's what we did, what Helene was talking about. We supported people with disabilities into enterprise or self-employment. We also supported small organizations that wanted to develop as a charity or develop as a social enterprise. It was hard work. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Worked with some of the bigger organizations like Leonard Cheshire on the Be the Boss scheme, which was for the armed forces. It was one of the first ones that was set up. And that was so rewarding. I worked with lots, it must have been 150, 200 people around the country setting up in business. And they are still in business, some of them, and they really have worked hard to keep that way. I think that's probably my most redeeming time. And that was when I came to Pink Shoe, because I sat on a committee or a panel as an expert in social enterprise. That was 12, 13 years ago. I don't think it's ever changed, and it still makes me go goose pimply when I attend a meeting.
Yes, yes, I can feel that emotion actually. And what do you wish you would have known when you were 21? You've had a very adventurous life. So what would you have wished to have known then?
Now that's to do with the fact that I was married then. I did have a child. I wish I'd known about mentors and somebody who would be able to help, a bit like Jill talked about and a bit like Noreen talked about, that you could find that real person within yourself, the imposter syndrome, the belief in yourself. So I think somebody and a way of finding personal independence as well as financial independence, because I think that's very, very useful to find early in life. And again, it's another aspect of Pink Shoe that I like, is the supporting of younger people coming into business.
Absolutely, thank you. And which woman, living or from history, inspires you the most and why?
Now, I thought there's so many people that inspire me, but the person who inspires me most is my mother. And that her name was Helene Henderson Coburn. And she went to war at about 17, 18. She traveled with the army. She came back and had three girls and brought us all up very, very strongly independent. But the thing that really defined her, and sadly, was the fact that she was quite ill and had rheumatoid arthritis, which racked her body, and she died at 60. But she never gave in to it, and would get up in the morning and would start a day and would work and would do everything. I remember her in a cast of plaster from her head to her hips, and she was clearing out the fire. So I always think one of the things that is a saying for me, which is you go to bed with a dream and wake up with a purpose. And she woke up with a purpose every day. And that's what I learned, is to keep going. And whatever happens against what you want to do, you just keep going through it.
Exactly, absolutely. You have to keep on going. And your final question, in one word, how would you describe Pink Shoe or Savitas?
Well, I'm going to break the rule, and I'm going to have a hyphen, because I couldn't think of anything single worded that would be different. So I'm going to say thought-provoking, and I'm putting a hyphen in the middle of it, so it's one word. Because from the first meeting I went home with ideas buzzing through my head. And I went to a meeting last week, and the same thing happened to me then. I just came away with all sorts of ideas buzzing through my head, and things I can do, things I should do, ways that Savitas would go, and the excitement of it. So thought-provoking.
Thought-provoking. Thank you, Susan. I would agree with you. And our fourth speaker, Dr. Amita Krishna. So Helene, if you would like to introduce her, please.
Thank you, Eve, and thank you very much, Susan. That really was another inspiring insight into the way you think and act. So inspiring this evening. So, Dr. Amita Krishna. Now, Amita is a partner for Christel International, and she works in the UK and Malaysia, but she also delivers projects in over 30 countries worldwide. She's also a visiting lecturer on strategy, innovation, and international business. And as I mentioned earlier, Amita is leading on the formation of her idea, the Pink Shoe Savitas Speaker Hub. So now over to you, Eve, and thank you, Amita.
Thank you, Amita. So again, what is the career step of which you are most proud?
Thank you very much, Eve, and thank you for having me today. The career step that I would say I am most proud of and a defining moment, I wouldn't say it's necessarily career, because I see career as my lifestyle. I love what I do, so I've never had a traditional career in terms of working for anyone. But the defining moment was actually making the decision and actually taking action to set up my business internationally. So in 1999, I woke up one morning and I thought I was making a fair amount of money. I was born in Africa, brought up in the UK. I thought there's got to be more to life than this. So, I had a client who asked me to raise some funds for them, and their head office happened to be in Malaysia. So I got on a plane, not knowing anyone, not really knowing where I was going. It was Christmas, and I went and delivered the project. Now, why was it so defining? First of all, it was a new country, new culture, and it was Christmas, as I said, so I was going to be away from home for the first time for Christmas in a long time. But actually being there and doing and meeting the network of people that I did, it actually resulted in me living in 7 different countries, enabling me to deliver the projects across 30 different countries. And my business was really strategy management and trade and investment. I made money, I lost money, I met amazing people along the way. And, it's really stuck with me, because had I not done that, I wouldn't be the person I am today. I think all that, the diverse experiences, working across multinational teams, learning how to respect, different cultures and thinking in a different way has really made me, as I said, what I am today, and the ability to just do it and adopt that Nike philosophy. So, because some of the countries I went to were quite scary, a landing strip, and that was it. So it was fascinating. And when I'd lost money and we had very little, I still look back and I think my life is very rich, and it's the experiences and the people I've met along the way and the connections I've made which have made my life rich.
Thank you, Amida. And what do you wish you had known when you were 21?
Well, it was a while back. It was hard to think back and think, when was I 21? So if I could sort of answer that question in a slightly different way, I don't necessarily think it was about the knowing, but I think it was more about the comprehension. If I had really and truly understood that nothing lasts forever, that would have been, that's a gift I would give to anyone today. Why? Because even though we were displaced from Uganda when I was young, so knowing I should have learned then as a child that things change very rapidly, and things are very uncertain, actually comprehending that life is very transient, they're 2 different things, knowing and doing and being. So had I known that, had I really taken that on board, I think some of the challenges and the roller coaster life I've had would have been somewhat easier on the heart.
Thank you, Amida. And which woman, living or from history, inspires you the most, and why?
I think it's like many of the others said, there are so many women who've inspired me. And if I could sort of well, you're here actually, I think I would like to say a special thank you to Helene and Jill, because they have given me the focus back in life that I had lost, because living abroad for 18 years, my original business I built from Yellow Pages. I did door knocking, I sold financial services. Then I built this strategy management consulting. Then I went abroad, then coming back, I was really starting again. And I was asking myself, how many times can you keep starting again? So Helene and Jill have really sort of provided that clarity, which was absolutely key, and provided me a shadow principal in the form of Maggie Semple, who's been amazing. But my real true inspiration, is my older sister. Why is it my older sister? I lost my mother many years ago, but my older sister, she was at an age when we left Africa and we lived in refugee camps. She was the one who, sacrificed the opportunities for education and worked in the supermarket to help educate us. She's the one who calls me every week to say, how are you doing? Are you okay? She's the one who reminds me, no matter how many times I fall down, the sun will rise tomorrow and there will be light at the end of the day. So, she's my inspiration and keeps me going in good, bad, and ugly times.
Thank you. And in one word, how would you describe Pink Shoe or Savitas?
2 companies there. So do I get 2 words or?
Yes, you can get to have 2 words.
Okay, so let me start off with Savitas. Savitas is, to me, is light. Yeah, it's a Sanskrit translation. Sanskrit it stands for sunlight and energy. And Savitas has really enabled me to share my ideas, bring all the experiences I've got across government, academia, and industry to create the Speaker Hub. Yeah, so swipe right for the Speaker Hub, and Pink Shoe, hope. Pink Shoe gave me hope when I was at a total loss coming back to the UK and thought, what do I do now? I have all these skills. I think I know what I want to do. I know I'm good at some things, but who am I? So Pink Shoe gave me the hope to continue and create that identity that I had lost.
Well, ladies, thank you very, very much indeed. And I would like to remind our participants that you can use the Q&A function for your questions or even comments. I think we would very much welcome your comments and questions. After listening to all of you, I have the question that has come to me is, you are all very creative, very entrepreneurial. You have actually taken the decision to do something with your life. I mean, I remember when I was at school, I was the only girl in my physics class. I was the only woman in the first business course that was run in Bristol, where I was living at the time. In my second career as an academic, I was often the only woman in a room full and sometimes an entire conference of men discussing complexity theory. And it is something that takes a certain confidence not to be overawed and to feel that you're absolutely equal with all those other men. And my question to you is, what do you think are the qualities that make the women that you are and the women that are part of Pink Shoe and Savitas so special, and help them to go forward? Helen, would you like to start us off?
Thank you, Eve. Yes, I'm happy to take that. Okay, so I'm going to say something slightly controversial, because
Yes.
Actually, I don't think we are special. I think we're brilliant and I think we're inspiring, but I don't think we're special. I think all women have the capacity and the capability to do what we are doing. And if we're doing anything, then I hope we're being torchbearers for women who don't feel capable of doing that, because I believe that all women are. These women on this call and everyone within Pink Shoe Savitas is very, very special. But as I say, so is everyone else, in my opinion. Thank you, Eve.
Thank you. Jill, what do you think makes women able to actually stand out?
Well, it's quite interesting because I think it's about not being alone. It's about not being loners. It's about collaborating. So I think we don't feel that we are the one or we have to take the credit for anything. We're very focused on what the outcome is going to be, and we collaborate to make that happen. But I also think that women who are part of Pink Shoe and now Savitas do have self-belief. And I go right back to my childhood, and that I was fortunate that my parents gave me the gift of believing that I could do anything I wanted to. And I think my passion since I retired from the House of Commons are helping children, women and small businesses to grow and develop and thrive. And I think with the children particularly, it's giving them self-belief. But I do see that characteristic in the women that are part of Pink Shoe Savitas and the women that we meet from around the world. But what makes us successful is collaboration.
Yes, absolutely. I agree entirely. Susan, any thoughts?
Well, I would go back to what I was saying about the person who inspired me most. And I would say what Jill said. I was brought up to believe that I was equal. I don't know any different. So I think it's personal equality. And I go into the world and I go into a job thinking that I'm equal with everybody else. And I should have a chance as everybody else does. And I don't think of it in any other way.
Thank you very much. And would Noreen and Anita, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I think we're all tied by similar values. It's something that we recognize in each other. And it's something that's very deep. It's collaborative, it's supporting people, it's being a role model, knowing what we're doing is helping other people. It's funny. I mean, I've ever since I've been a member of Pink Shoe, I know I am home. I know that sounds funny, but I am with people who support me. I can support them. I feel in a trusted environment. We all have inner self-confidence. I don't think there's a lot of shrinking violets within the Pink Shoe environment because we tend to push everybody forward as well. So we celebrate each other while supporting each other and promoting each other. So yes, it is, as Jill said, collaboration. It's also recognizing that everybody should have an opportunity and allowing them to have it.
Great, thank you. Anita, do you have any?
Sure, yeah, I think it's more, I agree with the rest of the panel. However, I think that, there's that innate ability to be sensitive. So tuning in to that capacity to have that emotional connections, whereas, I'm not saying all men, but generally we're more open with our feelings and using that for the betterment of, becoming and supporting leadership for that emotional connection. And again, the ability to multitask. Yes. So we're good at juggling things. And I'm still convinced Windows was designed by a woman.
Okay, thank you. We are supposed to finish at 7:15, but I do have a very interesting question. If we can finish with that one, please. As COVID impacts on society, our leadership styles are changing. How can we maximize this opportunity for inclusive, opportunistic leadership? That comes from Sue Lawton. Thank you, Sue.
Shall I kick off with that one? I think the word in there, in my experience, is inclusivity, because with On Air that we've talked about, with World Business Women's Day, with many other things that I've been involved in, the Hay Festival, I've been absolutely gobsmacked by how many people from all around the world are joining into those things that they wouldn't normally have access to. And I think we need to capitalize on that. And we're certainly going to do that within Savitas, that we're not going to let go of this wonderful event we had last week. But I think taking the Hay Festival, for example, so many more thousands and thousands of people had the opportunity to enjoy it and share it, that I hope very much that events of that kind will continue to be face-to-face and live, but also online. And I think that's a huge opportunity that we can't let go of.
Yeah, and I think I'm going to add on a bit, sorry, to what Jill was saying. We should also allow a lot more of our softer female side to come forward. As a lot of leaders, we tended to push it a bit in the background. And we've discussed this a lot in our Pink Shoe events. I'm thinking of Lynn Copier and Session. And there's a way of balancing out the environment. And COVID has really opened up the floor for this to happen. It's a seismic event that's changed, and it's made people sit, stop and think. We need to be a bit more authentic to what we're doing and allow that balance to come through.
Thank you. I have a comment rather than a question from someone who has been a part of Pink Shoe. I would like to read it as a finale to this evening's session. I remember arriving at my first Pink Shoe event at Westminster as a guest, and although confident, had an element of imposter syndrome in the wonderful surroundings, never having had good experiences before at women's networking events. I found myself from that moment on, I have spent time with wonderfully supportive women and friends, And I know I would not have achieved the things I have without the opportunities I have been exposed to as a direct result of being an ambassador of Pink Shoe. And this is from Jacqueline Winstanley. And thank you very much indeed, Jacqueline. I think that finishes our session brilliantly. Thank you, Helen and Jill and Susan, Noreen and Amita. Thank you very, very much indeed. This is quite a memorable evening. It is being recorded so that our 16,000 members worldwide will have the opportunity to see.
Good.
No wish. Thank you so much, ladies, and thank you everyone for participating. And we'll see you again in November at our discussion on China, and our own chairman will actually be speaking. So see you all soon in November. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Eve.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.